If I asked you what was the most important scene in John Wick, you might mention one of the more memorable ones. Something like the club scene with its striking visual style and all that relentless action. Or maybe the climactic battle between John and his former boss. Or even the scene where his dog is killed, which really sets the story in motion. And of course, there are tons of other great scenes scattered throughout the movie. For instance, the infamous I'm Thinking I'm Back scene, or the montage where he digs up his old weapons, or the ending where he and his new dog walk off before the final credits. All these scenes are memorable and significant to the movie as a whole, but none of them are the most important scene in the movie. That's because the story's most important scene doesn't have to be its most memorable or exciting one. What it does have to do is it needs to build a connection between the audience and the main character, specifically a connection that's strong enough to keep the audience invested no matter what choices that character makes. So, believe it or not, John Wick's most important scene is actually this one.
John, I'm sorry I can't be there for you, but you still need someone to love. So start with this, because the card doesn't count. I love you, John. This illness has loomed over us for a long time, and now that I have found my peace, find yours. Until that day, your best friend, Helen.
The reason why this scene is so important is because the character John Wick is an anti-hero. Anti-heroes by definition lack some of the key traits that traditional heroes possess, and for that reason, writers have to do some extra legwork to convince the audience to care. In the case of John Wick, he's an anti-hero because he lacks things like moral goodness, a magnetic personality, and a respectable line of work. In order for an audience to get invested in a character like him, the writers need to humanize him. And they do this at the beginning of the story by showing us how wounded he is by his wife's death. Now that's a good start, but it's not until the scene where he receives the letter that we truly care about him. And this scene works for 3 different reasons. First of all, it shows us that his deceased wife loved him. The gesture of her sending a dog to keep him company after her death, that speaks volumes about their relationship. She truly cared about him, and anytime somebody cares about your main character, that convinces the audience to care as well. Number 2, this scene shows John in an emotionally vulnerable state. When he cries over the letter, we can't help but feel for the guy. This is an intimate moment that we, the audience, share with him. It's almost as if we're having a drink with John and he decides to disclose a painful secret to us. Whenever we become privy to something like that, we can't help but want to like and trust the person who shares that information. Third and finally, this scene gives us hope for John. When he takes the dog out of its cage, we want to believe that he can heal, that he can find solace in his wife's final gift to him. And that's exactly why it's so painful when the dog is killed a few scenes later. Both John and the audience lose that glimmer of hope, and because that hope is snuffed out in such a brutal way, we're eager to get behind John for the rest of the story. Even when he's displaying cold-blooded, remorseless behavior, we can't help but root for him until his revenge is complete. If you're a writer and your main character is an anti-hero, remember to build the proper connection between the audience and that character. Your main characters don't necessarily have to shed tears like John Wick, but they should give the audience a reason to care about them before their journey begins. One last thing I want to point out is that John Wick's most important scene comes before he fires even a single bullet. You might think that the best way to introduce an action hero is by showing them in an action scene, but that's not always the case. In fact, some of the best action heroes out there were introduced in emotional, family-focused moments. Think about Brian Mills from Taken when he brings his heartfelt yet lackluster gift to his daughter's birthday party. Think about Jack Bauer from 24 when his daughter mentions how glad she is that he's moved back home after a period of separation. And think about John McClane when he flies across the country to rekindle things with his wife, only to be disappointed when he learns that she's now going by her maiden name. All these scenes make us care about these heroes, and I think it's interesting that we care about them before they start throwing punches and pulling triggers. So the next time you sit down to watch a movie starring an anti-hero, pay attention how that character is introduced. And if it's an action movie you're watching, be patient, because sometimes you need a scene like this before you can fully enjoy a scene like this. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and maybe pass it along to a friend who likes action movies. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, and if you are a writer, remember to keep on writing.